She looked like just a black waitress bussing tables. Until a rich man humiliated her with $100 bill to make her quit. But what he didn't know, she secretly owns the entire restaurant chain. And when she walks into the boardroom in heels and power, his jaw drops, and so does his career. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story is already hitting home, make sure you smash that like button, because you're not going to want to miss what happens next. The Tuesday lunch rush at Southern Sun Kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. The air, thick with the comforting scents of fried chicken, simmering collard greens, and fresh-baked cornbread, buzzed with the clatter of silverware and the murmur of happy conversations. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the Atlanta location, glinting off the polished wooden tables and the sweet tea glasses beaded with condensation. At the center of this bustling world moved Danielle Brooks, her face a mask of serene focus. Dressed in a simple black polo, a clean white apron tied snugly around her waist, she looked like any other dedicated member of the wait staff. She cleared a table with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice, stacking plates with a soft clink, her eyes scanning the room for anyone in need of a refill or a friendly check-in. She was invisible in the way that good service staff often are, a crucial yet overlooked part of the machinery that made the place run. This invisibility was her greatest asset. Then the front door swung open with a force that made the little bell above it jingle in alarm. A man stormed in, trailed by two younger men in expensive, ill-fitting suits, who looked like they were struggling to keep up. The man in the lead, Preston Langley, was a vision of tailored arrogance. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his face set in a permanent sneer of dissatisfaction. He stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes sweeping across the restaurant with open disgust. "My God, what is that smell?" he announced, his voice carrying easily over the lunchtime chatter. Several conversations faltered, heads turned. "It smells like a cookout." One of his associates chuckled nervously, the other just stared at his shoe. Preston's gaze landed on the decor. The warm, rustic wood, the framed photos of smiling families sharing meals, the very things that made customers feel at home. "And the music," he scoffed, gesturing toward a speaker playing a smooth rhythm and blues classic. "Do they have to play this urban stuff so loudly?" Danielle watched him from across the room. She felt a familiar tightening in her stomach, a feeling she had known her entire life. It was the feeling of being judged before she had even spoken a word, but her expression remained unchanged. Her training, both in business and in life, had taught her that the first reaction is rarely the wisest. She placed the tub of dirty dishes on a nearby bus station and walked towards the entrance, her steps measured and calm. As she approached, she forced a warm, professional smile onto her face. "Welcome to Southern Sun Kitchen," she said, her voice even and pleasant. "Table for 3? Preston Langley looked down at her. He didn't just look at her, he looked through her. His eyes took in her simple uniform, her dark skin, her name tag that simply read Danielle. A smirk played on his lips, a cruel, dismissive little thing. He saw a stereotype, not a person. He saw a prop in his world, not the architect of hers. "A table?" he repeated, laughing a short, ugly laugh. He turned to his associates. "She thinks we're here to eat." He turned back to Danielle, his smirk widening. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a wallet that probably cost more than her first car. From it, he extracted a single, crisp $100 bill. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, waving it slowly in front of her face, as if she were a mesmerized animal. "Look," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You seem like a nice enough girl, but you don't belong in a place like this. It's not a good look." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent. The clatter of forks stopped. The music seemed to fade into the background. Every eye was now fixed on the drama unfolding at the entrance. Diners paused with food halfway to their mouths, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. A young man at a nearby table slowly, almost imperceptibly, raised his phone. Tyler Green, the assistant manager, saw the scene from behind the counter. A cold dread washed over him. He was only 25, trying to build a career, but his conscience screamed at him to intervene. He took a step forward, his mouth opening to say something, anything to shatter the suffocating tension. But before he could speak, Danielle moved. With a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, she gently took Preston's wrist. Her touch was light but firm. She carefully plucked the $100 bill from his fingers, and then, just as gently, she folded it and placed it back into the palm of his hand, closing his fingers around it. She looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze unwavering and clear. "You'll need this," she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "More than I will." Preston stared at the bill in his hand, then back at her, his face a mask of confusion. For a fleeting second, the smugness was gone, replaced by sheer bafflement. Then it returned, uglier than before. He let out a loud, mocking laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, full of derision. He thought it was a joke. He thought she was being defiant. He had no idea he was being given a warning. He had no idea he was standing in the house she had built, being offered a final chance at grace, and laughing it away. Preston Langley was not a man accustomed to being contradicted, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. The laughter that erupted from him was sharp and brittle, a sound designed to belittle and dismiss. He pocketed the $100 bill with a flourish, as if Danielle's quiet refusal was nothing more than a curious little piece of theater. "Oh, she's got spirit," he announced to his two associates, who shifted uncomfortably on their feet. He leaned in towards Danielle, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Listen, sweetheart," he began, the word dripping with patronizing sweetness. "I appreciate the hustle. I really, but you should aim a little higher than refilling sweet tea for a living." He gestured vaguely around the room. "This isn't a career, it's a pit stop." His eyes scanned her from head to toe, a dismissive, appraising look that made her feel like an object on display. He was performing for his audience of two, asserting his dominance in a space he clearly felt he owned by virtue of his wealth. Danielle simply stood there, absorbing the insults with a stillness that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. Her silence was a mirror, reflecting his own ugliness back at him, and he didn't like what he saw. So he pushed harder. The customer who had raised his phone earlier was now openly recording. A small red light, a silent witness to the unfolding humiliation. Preston, too blinded by his own arrogance to notice or care, continued his tirade. He pointed a manicured finger at her. "You see, people like me, we build things. We create empires. People like you serve us." Tyler, the assistant manager, could not stand it a second longer. His face was flushed with a mixture of anger and fear. He walked briskly from behind the counter, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "Sir, is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Can I help you find your table?" Preston turned his sneer on Tyler. "A problem? No problem at all. I was just giving your employee here some free career advice." He gave Danielle a look that was meant to be charming but landed as predatory. "She just doesn't seem to be taking it." He reached into his blazer again, this time producing a sleek metallic business card case. He flicked it open and slid out a card. He didn't hand it to Danielle. He threw it at her. The small rectangle of cardstock fluttered through the air and hit her squarely in the chest before falling to the floor. "Preston Langley, venture capitalist," he said, as if announcing royalty. "You give me a call when you decide you want to be someone's assistant. A real job. Maybe you can fetch my coffee." The card lay face up on the polished floor, a monument to his ego. Danielle looked down at it, then back up at him. She offered no anger, no retort. She simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod of acknowledgement, but not of defeat. It was a nod that said, "I see you. I see exactly who you are." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, the victor of a battle no one else was fighting. Preston watched her go, a triumphant smirk plastered across his face. He turned to his associates, spreading his hands as if to say, "See how it's done." "Some people," he said, his voice loud and clear for the whole restaurant to hear, "just don't know when to quit." The air in the restaurant remained thick with a tension you could almost taste. The quiet hum of conversation did not return. People stared, some in anger, some in pity, some in fear. They were all looking at him, the man who thought he had won. Tyler hurried after Danielle, catching up with her as she pushed through the swinging doors into the heat and clatter of the kitchen. The sounds of sizzling pans and shouting cooks enveloped them. "Danielle, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. I am so sorry. I should have stepped in sooner. I can have him removed." Danielle turned to face him. The blank professional mask she had worn in the dining room was gone. In its place was a calm, knowing smile. It was a smile that held secrets. A smile that knew the end of the story before the other characters had even finished their lines. She looked at the young manager, at his worried face and his decent heart, and felt a flicker of warmth. "It's all right, Tyler," she said, her voice a low, steady hum. She patted his arm, reassuringly. "Don't you worry about him." She paused, her eyes sparkling with something he couldn't quite decipher. It looked like confidence. It looked like power. "I'm better than he will be." Tyler stared at her, confused. He saw a waitress who had just been publicly humiliated. He couldn't see the queen who was patiently waiting for the right moment to checkmate a pawn. 10 years. A decade was a long time. Long enough to transform a life, to build an empire from dust and dreams. 10 years ago, Danielle Brooks was not the owner of a $200 million franchise. She was a cleaning lady. She worked the graveyard shift at a sterile corporate chain restaurant called Global Grill, a place that served bland, uninspired food to travelers and office workers. She spent her nights scrubbing floors, polishing chrome, and breathing in the scent of industrial-grade lemon cleaner. The work was grueling and thankless, but it gave her an intimate view of the restaurant world. She saw the waste. She saw the inefficiencies. Most importantly, she saw the missed opportunity. She saw the soulless menu and thought of her mother's kitchen, a place of warmth and love, where recipes were passed down like sacred texts. She thought of the rich, complex flavors of soul food, the food of her heritage, the food of her heart. One morning, fueled by a rare surge of boldness, she decided to act. She had typed up a proposal, a single page outlining how adding a few authentic soul food dishes, real macaroni and cheese baked in a casserole dish, collard greens, slow-cooked with smoked turkey, fried chicken seasoned with a secret family blend of spices, could revitalize their tired menu. She found the regional manager, a man named Mr. Henderson with a perpetual frown and a cheap suit, in his back office. She knocked timidly on the open door. He looked up from his paperwork, annoyed by the interruption. "What is it?" he grunted. She nervously presented her paper. "Sir, I had an idea for the menu," she began, her voice barely a whisper. He took the paper from her, his eyes scanning it with visible disdain. He read for a few seconds, then a small, cruel smile touched his lips. He didn't just smile, he chuckled. Then the chuckle grew into a full-throated laugh. It was a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed in the small office. "Soul food," he finally managed to say, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "You're the cleaning lady. What could you possibly know about culinary trends?" He crumpled her proposal into a tight ball and tossed it into the trash can beside his desk. "Stick to your mops, Danielle," he said, turning back to his work. "Leave the thinking to us." Danielle stood there for a long moment, the sound of his laughter ringing in her ears. She felt the familiar sting of humiliation, the hot shame that rises in your cheeks. But underneath it, something else was kindling. It was a slow-burning fire. It was anger. It was resolve. She didn't say another word. She turned, walked to the employee locker room, gathered her few belongings, and left. She never looked back. That night, she went to her mother's small apartment. With tears in her eyes, she told her what had happened. Her mother listened patiently, then took her daughter's hands in her own. "That man didn't see you, baby," she said softly, "but we do, and his loss is our gain." They started with what they had, a few $100s in savings and a collection of recipes written on faded index cards. They rented a tiny, forgotten storefront in a part of town most people avoided. They painted the walls themselves, a warm, sunny yellow. They bought second-hand tables and chairs. They called it Southern Sun Kitchen. In the beginning, it was just the two of them. Danielle cooked, and her mother worked the counter. The first few months were brutal. Some days they barely made enough to cover the cost of ingredients. But the food was good. It was more than good. It was honest. It was food made with love, and people could taste the difference. Word began to spread. First, it was the neighborhood. Then people started driving in from other parts of the city. Soon, there were lines out the door. Within 2 years, they opened a second location. Within 5, they had 10. Danielle was a natural. She had an instinct for business that was as sharp as her palate. She remembered the waste and inefficiencies she saw at Global Grill and built her company on a different model. One that valued its employees, listened to its customers, and never, ever compromised on the quality of the food. Now 10 years later, Southern Sun Kitchen was a titan of the industry. 38 locations across the Southeast, with a valuation of over $200 million, and Danielle Brooks, the former cleaning lady, was the sole owner. But she never forgot where she came from. Once a year, every year, she performed what she called her ground floor audit. She would select one of her restaurants at random, shed her designer suits and her CEO title, and put on the apron. For 1 week, she became a waitress again. She bussed tables, refilled drinks, and listened. She learned more in that 1 week than she did in a month of board meetings. She listened to the customers' complaints and compliments. She watched her managers in action. She observed how her employees, her work family, treated each other. And most importantly, she saw how the world treated a person they believed had no power. She took notes, not on a fancy tablet, but on a small notepad she kept in her apron pocket. Every interaction, every slight, every kindness was recorded. It was her way of staying connected to the heart of her empire. And today Preston Langley had just given her a whole lot to write about. Danielle's calm was not an absence of feeling. It was a fortress, built brick by brick over a lifetime of being underestimated. While Preston Langley saw weakness in her silence, she knew it was her most formidable weapon. In the quiet chaos of the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of the dining room, she pulled out her personal phone. Her thumbs moved swiftly across the screen, a stark contrast to the simple waitress persona she had so carefully constructed. Her first text was to her executive assistant, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman named Maria. The message was simple and direct. Incident at the Atlanta location. Do not intervene. Stand by. A reply came back almost instantly. Understood. Are you okay? Danielle typed back. Never better. Keep the jet on standby for tomorrow morning. She knew that Preston's type of arrogance was a self-immolating fire. All she had to do was give it enough oxygen and let it burn itself out. He thought he was making a scene. He had no idea he was auditioning for his own downfall. Her fingers danced across the screen again, this time opening a web browser. She typed in his name, Preston Langley. The search results painted a picture of a man buoyed by inherited wealth and a profound sense of entitlement. He was a mid-level venture capitalist, known more for his aggressive tactics and lavish lifestyle than for any real business acumen. She scrolled through articles and press releases until she found what she was looking for. An article from a regional business journal, published just last week. The headline read, Langley Capital Eyes Acquisition of Mama Pearl's Kitchen, Calls Rival Lowbrow. Danielle read the article carefully. Preston was quoted extensively, bragging about his plans to acquire Mama Pearl's Kitchen, a smaller, struggling soul food chain. In the article he dismissed Southern Sun Kitchen, her baby, her life's work, as lowbrow and lacking the sophistication for national expansion. A slow, cold anger as potent and steady as a rising tide filled her. He wasn't just insulting her as a person, he was attacking her legacy. He was trying to build his own little kingdom by tearing hers down. But here was the part Preston Langley didn't know. Here was the secret that made her smile in the kitchen so genuine, so full of quiet power. He was chasing a ghost. For the past 3 months, Danielle's corporate team had been in quiet, secret negotiations with the aging owners of Mama Pearl's Kitchen. The family-run business had been struggling, and they were looking for a buyer who would respect their heritage and protect their employees. They had turned down 3 of Preston's aggressive lowball offers. 2 days ago, on Monday morning, Danielle had personally flown to Charleston to meet with them. They hadn't met in a boardroom, but on the front porch of the family matriarch's home sipping sweet tea. She didn't come as a CEO. She came as a fellow keeper of family recipes. She gave them her word that their brand would be preserved, their employees folded into the Southern Sun family with better pay and benefits. The deal was finalized with a handshake before the lawyers had even finished the first draft of the paperwork. As of yesterday, Southern Sun Kitchen, her company, had officially acquired Mama Pearl's kitchen. The ink was still drying on the contract. Preston Langley was swaggering around Atlanta, trying to bully a company that, for all intents and purposes, no longer existed as an independent entity. He was trying to buy a house that she already owned. His entire regional strategy, the one he was so proud of, the one he was using to belittle her brand, was built on a foundation of sand. And he had no idea. Danielle closed the browser. She thought about the $100 bill he had flicked at her. $100 to quit her own restaurant. The irony was so rich, so profound, it was almost poetic. She wasn't just a boss, she was the market force that was about to make him completely and utterly irrelevant. She wasn't just going to win, she was going to rewrite the entire game board. He had tried to humiliate her in her house, she was about to dismantle his. Tyler Green sat in the cramped windowless back office, the hum of the old computer monitor a dull drone against the ringing in his ears. The door was closed, but he could still feel the residual tension from the dining room seeping through the walls. He felt sick to his stomach. He had replayed the scene in his head a dozen times, each time his own inaction stinging him with fresh shame. He should have said more. He should have kicked the man out immediately. But he had frozen. The fear of losing his job, a job he desperately needed, had been a cold hand gripping his throat. He ran a shaky hand through his hair and clicked his mouse, pulling up the restaurant's security feed. He found the timestamp and watched the whole ugly incident again, this time from the cold, detached perspective of the ceiling camera. He saw Preston's aggressive entrance, his sneering face, the contemptuous flick of the $100 bill. He saw Danielle's impossible calm, a quiet dignity, a stark contrast to Preston's loud-mouthed cruelty. He saw himself take that one hesitant step forward before stopping. He winced. He looked like a coward. As he watched, his phone buzzed on the desk. A notification from a local news app. He tapped it. His heart sank. A customer had posted the video online. He clicked the link. And there it was, filmed from a table-level angle. It was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. Preston's condescending voice, his use of the word sweetheart, the thud of the business card hitting Danielle's chest. It was all there, and the view count was climbing at an alarming rate. 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. The comments section was a torrent of outrage. People were furious. They were tagging news outlets, demanding to know the man's identity. Tyler felt a wave of nausea. This was escalating. This was becoming a PR nightmare for the company. His first instinct was to call corporate, to report the incident and the viral video, to cover himself. That was the smart play. That was what a manager was supposed to do. But then he thought of Danielle. He thought of her quiet strength. He thought of her parting words in the kitchen. "I'm better than he will be." It wasn't the statement of a victim. It was the statement of someone who was in control. Something about her calm under fire had stirred something in him. It was a kind of integrity he wanted for himself. He looked back at the security footage on his screen. This was evidence. Clear, indisputable evidence of what had happened, free from the shaky hands of a cell phone camera. An idea formed in his mind. It was a risk. It could get him fired. If Danielle was just a waitress, she might not want the attention. But if she was something more, his gut told him she was something more. He made a decision. He wasn't going to be a coward anymore. He minimized the viral video and went to the security software. He isolated the clip, downloaded the high-resolution file, and printed a series of high-quality still images from the footage. He then opened a word processor and typed a short, simple note. He printed it, folded it, and slipped it along with the printed images into a plain manila envelope. He walked out of the office and into the staff break area. He found Danielle's locker, the one with the simple temporary name tag on it. His heart pounded in his chest. He took a deep breath, slid the envelope through the small vent at the top of the locker door, and walked away before anyone could see him. The note inside was simple. It just said, "I saw what happened. This is from the security camera. I've got your back. Tyler." It was a small act in the grand scheme of things, a quiet gesture of solidarity. But in that moment, Tyler Green had chosen a side. He had stopped being an employee and had become an ally. The lunch rush had subsided, giving way to the lazy afternoon lull. The kitchen was quieter now, the staff focused on prepping for the dinner service. Danielle found Tyler wiping down the counter in the main dining room. She approached him quietly, a small manila envelope in her hand. "Tyler," she said, her voice low. "Can we talk for a moment? In your office." Tyler's heart leaped into his throat. This was it. He was either about to be praised or fired. He nodded, his mouth suddenly dry, and led the way back to the small, cluttered office. He closed the door behind them, the space suddenly feeling much smaller with the two of them inside. Danielle gestured for him to sit, but she remained standing. She held up the envelope he had slipped into her locker. "I got your note," she said. Her expression was unreadable, a calm, neutral mask. "Thank you." Relief washed over Tyler in a warm wave. "Of course," he stammered. What he did was not okay. I wanted you to know that someone saw it, and that I'd back you up if you wanted to report him to corporate." Danielle allowed a small, genuine smile to grace her lips. It transformed her face, softening the regal composure, and revealing a hint of the warmth that lay beneath. "I appreciate that more than you know, Tyler. It takes courage to do the right thing when you think no one is watching." She paused, her gaze steady and piercing, as if she were looking right into his soul, weighing his character. He felt like he was undergoing the most important job interview of his life. "You have a good heart," she continued, "and you care about this place, about the people in it." She glanced around the small office, at the spreadsheets taped to the wall, the schedules, the inventories. "You run a tight ship." "I try my best," Tyler said, feeling a flush of pride. "I love this company." "What it stands for. Do you know who founded it?" she asked, her tone casual, but her eyes were sharp. Tyler frowned. "I know her name, of course. Danielle Brooks. She's a legend. Started with just one little spot. Every employee handbook has her story in it." Danielle nodded slowly. She extended her hand, the one not holding the envelope. "It's nice to officially meet you, Tyler," she said. "I'm Danielle." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Tyler stared at her outstretched hand, then back at her face. The name tag said Danielle. Her name was Danielle. Danielle Brooks, the founder, the CEO, the billionaire, owner of the entire chain. He was standing in his tiny office, with the woman whose picture was on the first page of the corporate manual. A dozen fragmented thoughts collided in his brain. The ground floor audit. The stories of her working in disguise. Her impossible calm in the face of Preston's insults. Her cryptic words in the kitchen. It all clicked into place, with a staggering, dizzying clarity. "You're," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "You're Danielle Brooks?" "The founder." She gave a single, slow nod. The calm smile remained, but now he understood the power behind it. It wasn't the smile of a waitress. It was the smile of a queen observing the movements on her chessboard. Tyler felt the color drain from his face. He finally shook her hand, his own feeling clumsy and numb. I had no idea. I am so sorry about what happened out there. If I had known who you were." "You would have done what?" she interrupted gently. "Treated me with respect." "Tyler, the way you treat someone when you think they have no power is who you really are. And you showed me who you are. You're a good man." She let go of his hand, and the warmth of her grip lingered. "But," she added, her voice dropping, becoming serious and conspiratorial, "not a word of this to anyone. Not yet." Tyler's mind was racing. "What are you going to do about that guy? About Preston Langley?" he asked, his voice filled with a newfound sense of awe and excitement. He was in on the secret. He was part of the plan. Danielle's smile faded, replaced by an expression of cold, hard resolve. She looked at the printed security photos in her hand, her eyes lingering on Preston's sneering face. "First," she said, her voice as sharp and clean as breaking glass, "we let him bury himself. He seems determined to do most of the work himself." She looked up, meeting Tyler's gaze. "Then, I'll buy the cemetery." The rooftop bar was sleek and modern, a playground for the city's financial elite. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline as the sun began its slow descent, painting the clouds in hues of orange and purple. Preston Langley held court in the center of a plush white sofa, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. He was animated, his voice loud and brash. reenacting the scene from the restaurant for his 2 associates and a few other hangers-on who had joined their group. So I look her right in the eye, he said, puffing out his chest, and I tell her, "Sweetheart, you should aim higher." He was reveling in the memory, polishing it like a trophy. He had transformed a moment of petty cruelty into a tale of righteous dominance. In his version of the story, he wasn't a bully, he was a mentor, a tough love capitalist trying to inspire the little people. The truth, however, was leaking out into the world without his consent. One of his associates, the younger one who had looked uncomfortable at the restaurant, cleared his throat. "Preston," he said tentatively, holding up his phone, "you might want to see this. The video from the restaurant, it's going viral." Preston snatched the phone from his hand. He watched the shaky footage, his own face contorted in a smug sneer, his voice dripping with condescension. He saw the comments, the flood of anger and disgust directed at him. For a moment, a flicker of panic crossed his features, but it was quickly extinguished by another wave of arrogance. He handed the phone back with a dismissive wave. "So what?" he scoffed. "A bunch of nobodies on the internet are upset. Let them be. It's free publicity." He took a long sip of his scotch, the picture of unbothered superiority. He even seemed to enjoy the notoriety. He pulled out his own phone and showed the video to a newcomer who had just joined their table, as if it were a badge of honor. "Watch this," he said with a grin. "This is how you handle a sassy waitress who doesn't know her place." The associate who had shown him the video looked genuinely uneasy now. "I don't know, Preston," he muttered, shaking his head. "This looks really bad. The comments they're calling you racist, sexist." Preston laughed. A booming, dismissive sound. "Oh, please. People are too sensitive these days. They don't understand the pressures of the real world. She's probably back at that greasy spoon right now, bussing dishes for minimum wage and tips while I'm up here, about to close a deal that will change the entire food landscape of the South." His hubris was a blinding light, making it impossible for him to see the cliff edge he was gleefully tap dancing on. He had no idea of the juxtaposition, the cosmic irony playing out at that very moment. While he was bragging on a rooftop, sipping scotch and basking in his own imagined glory, Danielle Brooks was miles away, in a place far removed from the scent of fried chicken and the clatter of plates. She was in the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of her corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in downtown Atlanta. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a sharp, navy blue blazer, sitting at the head of a polished mahogany boardroom table. In front of her lay a thick stack of documents. Her personal legal team surrounded her, pointing out signature lines and explaining final clauses. She picked up a heavy, expensive pen. With a steady hand, she signed her name, Danielle Brooks, on the final page of the acquisition paperwork. It was done. Mama Pearl's Kitchen, the company Preston was so certain he was about to conquer, now belonged to her. He was fighting a war that had already been lost, and he was the only one who didn't know it. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. It was a trap, built not with steel and wire, but with Preston's own ego. The next morning, as Preston Langley sat in his office basking in the glow of his perceived victory, his assistant buzzed him through the intercom. "Miss Langley," she said, her voice professionally cheerful. "Miss Evans is on the line for you. She says she's calling from the corporate office of Mama Pearl's Kitchen." A wide, triumphant grin spread across Preston's face. This was it. The call he'd been waiting for. They were finally caving. His aggressive offers, his public posturing. It had all worked. He had broken them. He snatched the receiver. "Preston Langley," he barked into the phone. On the other end of the line was Maria, Danielle's executive assistant, her voice a masterclass in pleasant corporate diplomacy. "Miss Langley, thank you for taking my call," she began. "I'm calling on behalf of the board of Mama Pearl's. They have reviewed your latest proposal and would like to invite you to a final negotiation dinner to discuss the acquisition." Preston leaned back in his leather chair, a king upon his throne. "Finally," he said, "you're making a smart decision. When and where?" "The board would like to host you this evening," Maria said smoothly. 7 o'clock sharp. They've reserved the private dining room at the flagship location of Southern Sun Kitchen. For a split second, Preston froze. Southern Sun Kitchen, the place with the sassy waitress. The irony was so thick he could almost taste it. Then his grin returned, wider and more predatory than ever. Oh, this was beautiful. This was poetry. They were surrendering to him in the heart of their rival's territory. It was a power move, and he thought it was his. How fitting, He chuckled into the phone. I accept. I'll be there. Wonderful, Maria replied. The board is very much looking forward to it. We'll see you at 7. She hung up. Preston slammed the phone down in triumph. He stood up and walked to his office window, looking down at the city below. He felt like he was on top of the world. Jessica, he yelled to his assistant, clear my schedule for the rest of the day, and call the finest steakhouse in town. Make a reservation for my team for 10 p.m. tonight. We'll be celebrating. He clasped his hands behind his back, a picture of smug satisfaction. Let's celebrate, he murmured to himself, a wide, predatory smile on his face. He was imagining the look on the board's faces as he dictated his terms. He was imagining the press release announcing his victory. He was imagining the future. By this time tomorrow, he said to his reflection in the glass, I owned the South. He had no idea that he was a pawn being willingly moved into the kill box. The dinner wasn't a negotiation, it was a sentencing, and he was cheerfully walking towards his own execution. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, the Southern Sun Kitchen restaurant was a hive of quiet, purposeful activity. The dinner rush was in full swing, but behind the scenes, a different kind of preparation was underway. Danielle Brooks stood in the narrow alley behind the restaurant, the warm air carrying the familiar, comforting smells of her success. The frantic energy of the kitchen was a muffled roar behind the heavy metal door. Here, in the quiet of the evening, she was not a waitress or a CEO. She was a general on the eve of a decisive battle. She pulled out her phone, the screen illuminating her face, which was set in a mask of grim determination. She dialed a number from her contacts, her personal lawyer. He answered on the first ring. It's time, she said. Her voice was calm, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of command. Her lawyer's voice came back, crisp and professional. Are you certain, Danielle? Once we file this, his access to the acquisition data room will be frozen. It will effectively terminate his standing off. Danielle looked up at the darkening sky. She thought of the look on Preston's face, the casual cruelty, the flick of the $100 bill. She thought of Mr. Henderson, the manager who had laughed at her dreams and thrown them in the trash. She thought of a lifetime of being told she didn't belong. I'm certain, she said, her voice as cold and hard as steel. Proceed. She hung up the phone without another word. She knew that at that very moment her legal team was electronically filing a series of documents. They were official notices, injunctions and letters of ownership, all flowing into the inboxes of Preston Langley's financial backers, his legal team, and the regulatory bodies that governed such deals. It was a digital blitzkrieg, a silent, instantaneous maneuver that would cut him off at the knees before he even knew a battle had begun. His access would be revoked, his offers would be nullified, his future in the regional market would be erased. Next, she opened her messaging app and sent a group text to the senior members of the Southern Sun Kitchen Board of Directors, the trusted circle she had built her empire with. The message was short and to the point. He is on his way to the flagship. Make sure they're all seated tomorrow for the 9 a.m. emergency meeting. All of them. The they was implicit. She meant Preston's primary investors, the people who wrote his checks, the people who had partnered with him on a dozen other ventures. She wasn't just taking away his new toy. She was going to make sure he lost all his old ones too. Her quiet wrath, which had been simmering just beneath the surface all day, was no longer quiet. It was a plan in motion. It was a sequence of events that was now, finally, unstoppable. She put her phone back in her pocket, took one last deep breath of the night air, and pushed the heavy door open, stepping back into the light of the house she had built. Preston Langley arrived at the flagship Southern Sun Kitchen location at precisely 7 o'clock. He wasn't just on time, he was staging an entrance. He stepped out of a gleaming black town car, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit. He smoothed his silver hair and strode toward the entrance, with the confidence of a conquering general, arriving to accept the surrender of a defeated city. He expected a quiet, tense atmosphere, perhaps a nervous host who would scurry him away to a private room. Instead, he was greeted by a scene of surprising formality. The entrance to the main dining room was cordoned off, with velvet ropes. A woman in a sharp corporate suit, holding a tablet, stood waiting for him. Mr. Langley, she asked, with a polite, professional smile. Welcome, we've been expecting you. Preston nodded, gratified by the reception. The board of Mama Pearls is waiting, he asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. "This way, sir," the woman said, gesturing for him to follow her. She didn't lead him to a small private room in the back. Instead, she led him to the restaurant's grandest space, a large glass-walled atrium usually reserved for major events. Inside, seated around a massive circular oak table, were not the elderly family owners of a struggling chain he had expected to see. Instead, he saw a group of about 10 men and women, all dressed in immaculate business attire. Their faces were serious, their expressions unreadable. Preston recognized a few of them immediately, and a knot of confusion began to tighten in his stomach. He saw Marcus Thorne, the head of a major food distribution network. He saw Elizabeth Chen, a powerful media strategist. He saw the franchise partners who owned the most successful Southern Sun locations in Georgia and Florida. This wasn't the board of Mama Pearls. This was the corporate board and key partners of Southern Sun Kitchen. Preston stopped in his tracks, his arrogant stride faltering. What was this? Was this some kind of bizarre power play? Was the Southern Sun board here to witness his triumph over their brand? The thought was so absurd, so egotistical, that it was the only one his mind could conjure. His confusion quickly curdled back into his default setting. Arrogance. "All right," he said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. He walked towards the table, scanning the faces of the powerful people staring back at him. "I see we have an audience. Very dramatic." He gestured towards an empty chair. "Where's the other party? The people I'm here to see. Let's get on with it. I have a celebration dinner to get to." The board members said nothing. They simply watched him, their collective silence a heavy blanket that smothered his bluster. Marcus Thorne, a man known for his jovial nature, looked at him with cold disappointment. Elizabeth Chen's expression was pure ice. Preston's smile began to feel strained on his face. The confidence that had buoyed him all day was beginning to evaporate under the weight of their silent judgment. He felt a prickle of sweat on his brow. Something was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice losing some of its commanding tone. "Is this a joke?" No one answered. The silence stretched on, becoming unbearable. It was a silence filled with knowledge, a silence that knew a secret he didn't. Then, from the far side of the room, a door opened with a soft click. The sound echoed in the cavernous space. Every head at the table turned towards the door. Preston followed their gaze, and in that moment his world shattered. Through the doorway walked Danielle Brooks, but it was not the Danielle he knew. The simple waitress apron and black polo were gone. In their place, she wore a sleek, custom-tailored power suit of deep charcoal gray that fit her perfectly. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she wore heels that clicked with quiet authority on the polished concrete floor. She moved with a purpose and a presence that commanded the entire room. There was no trace of the subservient woman he had tried to humiliate. This was a woman who was accustomed to being in charge, a woman who radiated an aura of unshakable power. Preston's jaw literally dropped. A small, strangled noise escaped his throat. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, pale white. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a feeling of falling from a great height. Beside him, one of his own business partners, whom he had brought along to witness his triumph, let out an audible gasp of recognition and horror. He had seen the viral video. He understood immediately. Danielle didn't look at Preston. Not yet. She walked calmly to the head of the table, to the single empty chair that was clearly reserved for her. The board members all nodded at her with a deep deferential respect as she passed. She took her seat, placed her hands on the table, and finally, slowly, turned her gaze upon Preston Langley. Her eyes were calm, but they held the cold, hard light of a surgeon's blade. The silence in the room was absolute, a suffocating vacuum waiting to be filled. When she finally spoke, her voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a diamond. "Good evening, Mr. Langley," she said, her tone even and dangerously polite. "Thank you for coming." She paused, letting him squirm in the spotlight of her attention. "Let's talk," she said, leaning forward slightly, "about the offer you think you're here to make." Preston Langley stood frozen, a statue of disbelief. His mind struggled to process the impossible reality in front of him. The waitress, the woman he had mocked and dismissed. She was sitting at the head of this table, in command of this room full of influential people. His brain stuttered, searching for an explanation. Any explanation that didn't lead to the terrifying conclusion that was dawning on him. "You," he stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. "What is this? Who are you?" Danielle let the question hang in the air for a moment. She looked around the table at her board members, then back at him. "I'm the woman who owns this restaurant," she said simply. "And the 37 other locations of Southern Sun Kitchen." She then looked pointedly at the seat that had been intended for the CEO of Mama Pearl's kitchen. "I'm also the woman who now owns Mama Pearl's." The words hit Preston like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his face a mask of horrified comprehension. The acquisition, his entire regional play, it was gone. He hadn't been outbid. He had been outmaneuvered by a person he hadn't even known was in the game. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible. We were in negotiation." "You were in negotiations," Danielle corrected him calmly. "We were in the process of closing. The deal was finalized yesterday morning." A screen behind her flickered to life, and the logo for Southern Sun Kitchen appeared, followed by the words "Welcomes Mama Pearl's Kitchen to the family." Preston's future, bought and sold before he even walked in the door. "So, you see, Mr. Langley," Danielle continued, her voice maintaining its chilling calm, "you're officially shut out of the market you were so keen to enter. The market you publicly referred to as lowbrow." Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "But this meeting isn't just about business, it's also about character." She nodded to an assistant, and the image on the screen changed. It was now playing the high-resolution security footage from the restaurant the day before. The entire room, the board members, the franchise partners, Preston's own associate, watched in stunned silence as Preston's tirade played out in crystal-clear detail. They saw him sneer. They saw him flick the $100 bill. They heard his condescending words. "You don't belong in a place like this." They saw him toss his business card at her chest. Preston watched, mortified, as his own cruelty was laid bare for everyone to see. The smug bravado he had felt was now revealed as pathetic, ugly bullying. When the clip ended, the screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy with judgment. Danielle let the weight of it press down on him, suffocating him. Finally, she locked her eyes on his. Her voice was quiet, but every person in the room heard it as if she had shouted. "You walked into my restaurant," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "You insulted my staff, my customers, and my culture, and then you offered me $100 to quit my job." She paused, letting the memory of the humiliation fill the space between them. "I'm a businesswoman, Mr. Langley. I appreciate a good deal." She leaned back in her chair, a picture of absolute, untouchable power. "I declined your $100 offer, and instead, I just bought your entire future out from under you for free." Preston was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The smug, arrogant man who had walked in minutes before had completely deflated. In his place was a small, pale man, stripped of his power, and exposed for the petty tyrant he truly was. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Preston stood there, reeling from the revelation, his face a ghastly shade of grey. Danielle did not give him a moment to recover. She turned her attention away from him, dismissing him as if he were no longer relevant, and addressed the room. Her voice was firm, the voice of a CEO making a final, non-negotiable decision. "We at Southern Sun Kitchen pride ourselves on a culture of respect," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her board and partners. "Respect for our food, respect for our customers, and most importantly, respect for our people, from the dishwasher to the regional manager." She then turned to Preston's associate and the silent investors she had summoned for the following morning, knowing full well they were already connected to this meeting via their own concerned calls. "We cannot, and we will not, partner or do business with any individual or any firm that behaves with the kind of blatant disrespect and prejudice we all just witnessed." Her words were a death sentence. Preston's associate, a man concerned with his own career, immediately began to back away, both literally and figuratively. "Preston, I had no idea," he stammered, looking at the board members with pleading eyes. "Our firm does not condone this kind of behavior. We had no knowledge." From across the city, the calls his partners were making to the board members confirmed the verdict. Before Preston could even formulate a defense, his professional life was being dismantled. His primary funding partner, patched in via a speakerphone placed discreetly on the table, spoke with cold fury. "Preston, you're a liability. We're invoking the morality clause. You're dropped. From this deal, from all our deals, we're out." Another voice followed, "Consider our advisory relationship terminated. Effective immediately." It was a cascade of ruin. His lawyer, who had been standing helplessly in the corner, tried to object. "Now, let's not be hasty," he began, but Marcus Thorne, the distribution head, cut him off with a wave of his hand. "It's too late for hasty, counselor. Your client has shown us exactly who he is. The video has over 5 million views. He's toxic." Security guards, dressed in discreet black suits, appeared at the edge of the room. They moved with a quiet efficiency, flanking Preston. He looked around wildly, his eyes begging for an ally in a room full of judges. He found none. He was escorted out of the room, not with a struggle, but with the stunned, shuffling gait of a man in a trance. His face was frozen in a mask of pure disbelief, the face of a man who had been pushed from the top of a mountain he never realized he was climbing. After the doors closed behind him, a quiet breath of relief seemed to pass through the room. The tension broke. Danielle's expression softened. She had been a surgeon, excising a cancer. Now, she was a leader, ready to build. She turned her attention to the young man who had been standing silently near the back of the room, watching the entire drama unfold with wide, astonished eyes. "Tyler Green. Tyler," she said, her voice warm again. He jumped, startled to be addressed. "Yes, Miss Brooks, please call me Danielle," she said with a smile. She looked at her board. "As you all know, the acquisition of Mama Pearls means we have a new region to integrate. It's going to require strong leadership, someone who understands our values from the ground up." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she looked directly at Tyler. "Tyler, you showed integrity and courage. You put our values ahead of your own personal risk. That's the kind of leadership I want." She smiled. "Congratulations, you're our new regional director for the entire Georgia territory." Jaws dropped. Even the seasoned board members looked surprised. Tyler's own jaw felt unhinged. He stared at her, speechless. Regional director. Just yesterday he was an assistant manager worried about losing his job. Today, the woman he had tried to protect was giving him an entire territory. He had stood up for a waitress, and in doing so had secured a future he had only dreamed of. The story did not end in that boardroom. It exploded. By the next morning, the video of Preston Langley's rant had surpassed 12 million views. News outlets had picked it up, and investigative journalists had quickly identified him. His name and face were everywhere, inextricably linked with his ugly behavior. He became a meme, a cautionary tale, a symbol of entitled arrogance. People online dubbed him the $100 Man, a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. He tried to issue a public apology through a high-priced PR firm. It was a slick, professionally written statement full of hollow words, like deeply regret, and a momentary lapse in judgment. But it was too little, far too late. The public saw it for what it was, a desperate attempt at damage control. Commenters flooded his social media pages, and the pages of his former investment firm. "Did you offer your PR firm $100 to quit too?" one comment read. Another said, "Money can't buy class, and it sure can't buy you out of this one. $100 Man." His apology backfired, only adding fuel to the fire of public outrage. Meanwhile, a different story was captivating the nation. Danielle Brooks, at the urging of her media strategist, agreed to a single television interview. She appeared on Good Morning America, not in a power suit, but in a simple, elegant dress. She sat, not as a vengeful victor, but as a poised and graceful leader. She didn't gloat about Preston's downfall. Instead, she told her own story. She spoke of her mother's recipes, of scrubbing floors at Global Grill, of being laughed at for her dream. She talked about the importance of dignity, respect, and seeing the value in every single person, regardless of the job they hold. Southern Sun Kitchen was built on the idea that everyone deserves a seat at the table, she said, her voice resonating with quiet power, and that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness, whether they are serving the meal or eating it. She spoke of promoting Tyler, highlighting his integrity as the true spirit of her company. Her story was a thunderclap of inspiration. Millions of people watched, moved by her journey from cleaning lady to CEO. She wasn't just a business owner, she was a testament to the power of resilience and the quiet strength of walking in one's purpose. The narrative was no longer about Preston's fall, it was about Danielle's rise. She had not only won the war, she had won the hearts of millions. A month later, the buzz had quieted down. The news cycle had moved on. Preston Langley had faded into disgraced obscurity, his career in ruins, but at the flagship Southern Sun Kitchen in Atlanta, a small, permanent change had been made. Danielle Brooks walked into the restaurant one afternoon, not in disguise, but as herself. The hostess greeted her with a bright, genuine smile. "Miss Brooks, welcome. Your table is ready." The new regional director, Tyler Green, met her and walked with her through the dining room. He was wearing a sharp new suit, but his smile was the same kind, humble smile she remembered. He led her to her favorite booth, the one in the corner with a perfect view of the entire restaurant. It was the same area where she had been standing when Preston Langley first insulted her. As she slid into the booth, she noticed a small, polished brass plaque affixed to the wall just above the table. It was new. She leaned closer to read the elegant script engraved upon it. It read, "This table is reserved for the woman who built this house." Danielle smiled, a real deep smile that reached her eyes. She looked around at the bustling restaurant, at the families laughing, at the servers hustling, at the rich, beautiful tapestry of life unfolding in the space she had created from a dream that was once crumpled up and thrown in the trash. Don't judge people by the apron they wear. You never know if the waitress is really the boss. And when you try to humiliate someone who owns the table, don't be surprised when they take your seat. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.